Yeah.
So, as you guys know, here in Amarillo, we've been discussing some things that are very, very important.
Absolutely.
And I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Mark, Lee Dickson, and Miss Sheena. I actually met her for the first time just a couple of days ago.
First time in person.
First time in person. Yes, that's correct. So I'm going to let them kind of introduce themselves. We'll start with Sheena. Tell us a little bit about what you do, what you've been doing, how you've met Mark, and then we'll do Mark. Okay?
Sounds good. So I am Sheena Rodriguez, Florida State, Texas. We are, of course, is the number one state that's here in the country, that we have the most encounters, more than any other state, more unaccompanied minors, just in the last 3 fiscal years alone, more than 50,000, just over 50,000 that have been released to sponsors across Texas counties. And we have the most shelters that house unaccompanied minors in the state of Texas. California, the last documentation of it was about 52. So over 50 facilities across the great state of Texas that are housing unaccompanied minors. And that was back in 2020. They don't like to divulge that information all that much. You know, these government agencies like HHS, Health and Human Services, and ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement. But this is impacting all of Texas. This is one of the many ways that the city quite literally is a border town. And so then prior to my activism with regards to border security and interior enforcement, a few years when my children were younger, actually started off my active, nothing to do with politics whatsoever. I'm pretty still new to the political arena within the last, few years or so, working with state legislators and things of that nature and testifying before Congress and things. But prior to that,
a few of those.
Yeah, prior to that, I was a volunteer counselor at a local pregnancy center up there in the DFW area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is where I'm from. And so I actually met Mark a number of years ago. We were down there. I was down there with a group of people staying at, one of the many times that we were down there in the RGV area. Just so happened that Mark was staying in the same spot, and he was doing an interview similar like this out there in a hotel, and ended up going out to dinner with us group, the group of us out there, and just kind of always, I guess kept in contact, had that line of communication up. And then he reached out a few months ago and said, hey, I think I'm working on something that we could work on together. I could use your help. And it's been a few different counties now that I've helped, cities, just a handful that I'm thankful to be able to help, because this is one of the, I'm sure, crossover. So
yeah, for sure. Having some time to do this, and over the course of the last several days, I just don't know when how you make so much time for these things. And we discussed about 20 minutes ago at our previous meeting down at High Plains, as far as just the contribution and the rewards being in heaven. And so I'm just glad that he has you both fighting this fight, because it's a breath of fresh air for all of us. It'll be pretty conservative up here, pretty red, and we'll get into some of that here in a minute. Mark, go ahead and tell us your story just real quick, Mark.
So my name is Mark Lee Dickson, director with Right to Life of East Texas, and founder of what's called the Sanctuary Cities for the Unborn Initiative. I have been involved in this work as far as the Sanctuary City for the Unborn Initiative since 2019, and that paved the way for the Texas Heartbeat Act, and I ended up being the only private citizen that was sued in that lawsuit, went before Supreme Court of the United States, and all 9 justices agreed the case against me should be dismissed. So we've seen a lot of victories, and here in Amarillo, we're wanting to see a victory here. A lot of people are saying that, do we really need an ordinance? Texas is abortion free, but the reality is there are still loopholes we've got to close. There are people that are being trafficked across state lines for abortions in New Mexico, and we have a way to save those innocent lives of those unborn children that are being taken against their will across state lines. And so these ordinances do that. These ordinances protect the smallest, most vulnerable among us. And it really is a massive blow to the abortion industry in New Mexico. It would be a great thing to take the business away from New Mexico and see the state of Texas, all of us united to help these moms be those great moms that we know they can be for those unborn children.
Right. You know, you said something there that heard it at one of our council meeting a few weeks back. Tends to hinge on it's already what's the need for the ordinance. I don't believe for 1 second that's how they really feel.
Right.
I believe there's more to that. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. You know, in 1968, we had the pre-Roe statutes, which criminalized abortion from the point of conception unless the life of the mother is in danger. And those statutes were enforced, traditional means, but what was happening? In 1968, 1969, a guy by the name of Curtis Wayne Boyd, he committed over 10,000 illegal abortions. He killed the population of Athens 2 years in a row. And so about 5,000 at that time.
Wow.
And so it's very telling that when people do not enforce the laws that are on the books, we're in trouble. There are DAs out there that have said that they're not going to prosecute against certain violations of abortion laws. And so we have to look at our laws that we have, and we have to say, is this the best that we can do? Are there any loopholes that we can close so that we don't end up in we recreate the past? Curtis Wayne Boyd went on to open up the first. He did illegal abortions in Dallas-Fort Worth area, then went to New Mexico. 1973 rolled around. He returned to Texas, abortion facility. In his lifetime, 500,000 unborn children made in the image of God. His two facilities, one was located in Dallas, and then one that is currently operating still in New Mexico. Both of them combined, we're talking about over his lifetime. That is more than several of the wars that we've seen here in this state, of American lives that have been lost. And so no as high as Curtis Wayne Boyd. I'm of the belief that we had some different laws in the books that were closing up some of these loopholes. We can look back, hindsight's always 20/20, but there's no excuse here in our day and age not to close up those loopholes that we know exist.
You know what I find so interesting is that when I read up a little bit on Sarah Weddington, you and I have conversated a little bit about that. I found the standing that she utilized was the 14th Amendment. And that amendment was actually formulated to actually help the newly freed slaves into the Civil War. And we look at the numbers of the African American community that are being aborted. The number that I keep hearing is 35%. The hypocrisy and the contradiction of all these social justice groups that say they're for black and brown, it's just unheard of that you use the term and I won't repeat it, but but it is a useful. It starts with an I. That these people they're utilized for their emotion to get out there and take charge and be noise polluters, if you will. But if they just
Useless foot
There
soldiers,
you
that's
go.
what we'll call them.
there you go. That if they only knew the truth, and this is why I know that they truly don't really have all the capable information that they proclaim to have. They sound like they're making a good argument. It's about social injustice, but if you would just read up on the actual truth of these things, Hosea 4:6 says that my people perish for lack of knowledge, information. And guys, I stressed, go find out who is behind the black codes, all these things. And you'll find out that the very people that say they're for your social justice are the people that are implementing these things to basically, let's just call it what it is, it's genocide.
Yeah. You know, people aren't really seeing the bigger picture at times when we're talking about, so Texas, abortion's outlawed from the moment of conception, unless the life of the mother's in danger. And we have all these different laws in the books. We have the pre-Roe statutes, which criminalizes the abortionist and from committing an abortion on a child from the point of conception. So there's penalties there against the abortionists and those who are aiding and abetting the abortionists. That's enforced by the government. The Texas Heartbeat Act is in place. It's not enforced by the government, but it's from the point of a detectable heartbeat. And so the penalties are against the abortionist and anyone aiding and abetting the abortionist. Then you have the Texas trigger law, and that just deals with the abortionist. It ups the penalties against the abortionist. And so when we look at these things, the loophole, there's no private enforcement from the point of conception to detectable heartbeat. And that's one of the things that this ordinance does, is it makes that available from the point of conception. And so if there is a violation of this ordinance, we can actually utilize that mechanism, which allows private citizens to file a lawsuit against the abortionists and those who are aiding and abetting the abortionists.
So where's the disconnect? Because you made a comment a little earlier about the DAs just not enforcing.
Yeah.
When a mother is engaged in a car accident, she's carrying a baby. We see that penalized. We see that 100 out of 100 times. The charge is you killed 2 people.
Or murder,
Yes, right?
homicide.
You see that. You've heard that. So what is it that they can't apply the same measure? What is really going on here? Is it due to some type of politic? Let's get to the brass tacks.
Yeah. In a part, I think it's to kind of take a few steps back here. One, when we're talking about laws, there's only one perfect law out there, and that's the Word of God. And no errors in the law of God. There's no inconsistency in the law of God. It is always consistent. It's always authoritative. It has no, the jurisdiction of the Word of God is everything that's in existence.
Sure.
And so just to clarify that, now, our laws are not always consistent. We are mankind. And our laws are not perfect. We're inconsistent. We will say in some contexts that unborn child's life being taken. But in other cases, they don't treat it as a double homicide. We should. And, these ordinances that we're pushing going as far as we possibly can within the framework of the laws of our states, but we have to work within the framework that the state provides.
Right.
And what we're seeing, we found a way that we can actually go after those who are trafficking women and unborn children across state lines for abortion. And so we're addressing that to the fullest. There's a legal scholar over in Mexico that works for the expert legal scholar, and he that cities and counties in New Mexico can do, or the New Mexico government can do about what laws Texas chooses to pass. And so if Texas counties and cities choose to pass abortion bans, saying that we're gonna do everything we can over our roads, and they can't do anything about that. Now, we're not saying that women can't go to New Mexico at all. All we're saying is that we're saying it is against the law to assist a mother of an unborn child in across state lines. So anything, to that end, we're just doing everything we can to stop that. It's not interfering with the right to travel. We are clearly addressing those who are aiding and abetting that abortion, those who are assisting the abortion of an unborn child through trafficking them across state lines.
And again, the law, if you're an accessory to any other crime, it's applied. Let's go rob a bank. Detective says, how this idea began. I know you didn't go in the bank yourself. You're in the car waiting. You conspired, right?
Right.
Guilt by association, we've heard that plenty of times. Sheena, so I think an expert in that field of what you're, there's an overlap here. These traffickers, they're utilizing the system, aren't they?
They have been for quite some time. And it's also honestly, it's our own federal government that is helping to facilitate this. So what we're talking about, there's a few different elements here. Number one, you have those, first, I feel like I've been on repeat here, but it's so important. You can't stress this enough. Abortion and child abuse, sexual abuse of women and young girls and little girls, those who are forced into prostitution, and those like the unaccompanied minors that are coming across our borders. Abuse and sex trafficking has always gone hand in hand with abortions. And that's not Sheena Rodriguez, an overcaffeinated mom, who's saying that. There's been studies that have been done connecting those elements together. And so it helps to continue the exploitation of women and children. It helps to hide it. And a lot of the times, those who exploit children and women will use this as a tool to be able to keep them under their thumb, to keep them quiet, or to, and of course, to continue the exploitation. Now, with regards to how is this tied to the border, one of the things that a lot of people may not realize is that for several administrations now, since unaccompanied minors have been coming over in large numbers under the Obama administration, it has been the practice of HHS, Health and Human Services, to provide abortion services for unaccompanied minors and for women that are coming over that say that they want an abortion. And so people have asked before, well, like, how is that possible? Because of the Hyde Amendment. Again, it's these loopholes that currently exist with regards to the unaccompanied children, the unaccompanied minors coming over. they are actively, there was a field guidance 21 that came out under HHS that said that they were going to expedite and ensure that abortion care was readily available for every unaccompanied minor that asked for one, which of course we can, it goes into the same thing that we're seeing at these abortion facilities where a lot of the times there really is no informed consent. I've stood at the banks of the Rio Grande in Texas and in Arizona, and I can tell you there's a number of people from different countries coming over that do not speak Spanish or English. Yeah. You've got 170 different countries that's coming over that border. And so how can there be informed consent, especially if it's a child? Obvious that these unaccompanied minors are coming over. There's no parental consent whatsoever. They do not also advise or tell or inform. If anything, HHS's own policy is to not inform these sponsors. They will expedite the abortions of these unaccompanied minors prior to them releasing to the sponsors. And it specifically states in this field guidance and in HHS current policy that they will not just expedite it and ensure that these abortion care is available, but that they will also expedite. That includes transporting over state lines from states like Texas, where we do have some of the legislation in place. And they're able to get around the Hyde Amendment because unaccompanied minor, they're able to say this is all emergency situations, which the Hyde Amendment, as it's currently understood and applied, allows for those exceptions. So again, when we're talking about the unaccompanied minors, with Texas receiving just over 50,000 in just the last 3 fiscal years, over 80,000 in the last 5 years. There's no end in sight. And HHS is actually attempting to codify or to make permanent some of their very dangerous policies that have been just failed for several years now. So, why not make it permanent, right? And so that they're going to continue these harmful policies irregardless of the impact to the children and to these women that have been exploited and allowing them to continue to be exploited, but also irregardless of the sovereign state laws that are implemented. And so it is a very, very disheartening, and it's quite frankly demonic in my opinion. And that's an area that a lot of Americans really, a lot of the times when I talk to them, it's the first time that they're hearing it.
Right. Well, with us being, I'm going to just say it, we would be a hub. We have I-27 and I-40. What type of residual crime element would follow and people would set up shop around this area? See, the folks don't understand the footing that this is going to gravitate to. And if the residual crime element sets up shop here because we don't have any such ordinance and we have that hub, what is that going to do to a community?
Well, and that's the other unfortunate reality here is that if with regards to abuse and trafficking situations, you've got Houston and DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth, that go back and forth between number 1 and number 2 of the sex trafficking capitals of Texas. And if you look at the map, geographically, this area, Amarillo in particular, and areas like Lubbock and the surrounding areas, Mark will go into here in a second, I'm sure. I hate to put words in your mouth, but is that area people coming and being transported for the purposes of an abortion from the 2 major hubs and the 2 most populated.
You're being kind when you say transported. I just call it trafficked.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to be transported for the purposes of an abortion from the Houston and DFW area, including those are the 2 top spots in the state of Texas where these unaccompanied minors have been released to. They're going to come through Amarillo. To be able to get, because that's their closest entry port into New Mexico.
Well, and if we could, I know sometimes just gloss over certain things, and when we're talking about trafficking, there's really 2 people we're talking about here. We're talking about the unborn child, which is always 100% taken against their will. Unborn child never wants to be trafficked across state lines for purpose of abortion. But then there's also the mother of the unborn child. Now, some people will say, I've seen this in Miss Magazine, I've seen this in other news publications, that they'll say, well, if the mother of the unborn child is willing, it's out on the HHS website, is trafficked, is always, there are willing, are being trafficked. On that issue.
We talk about I grew up in a situation where it was, I actually as a child, my mother in a abused women's shelter for quite some time. And when you get into situations like that, and we're even talking about grown adult women, nevertheless children, they say, well, but that woman is, which looks far different than most people think. It does most of it does not look like what Sound of Freedom or is. It's occurring at every single people that they know, a pastor, things of those nature. Oh, but I have a young daughter. Oh, but him. You remember those when we were young, dumb, and not the smartest, right? At prefrontal cortex, was it right? Just like the abused wife, that's willful, right? Just like the prostitute, or just like the unaccompanied minor, or the migrant that crossed over, having to pimp themselves out to pay for their toll here to the United States. Oh, but that's willful, right? Because they're working off that. Really? My educational background is in developmental psychology. Just it goes against common knowledge in these realms, and that's when HHS also recognizes that, and that's not just HHS. That's even including the state's policies to this and the laws. I mean, this is across the board. Is that they know good gosh darn and well that even if it's quote unquote willfully done, it's not really willfully done.
Right. Well, look, let's take a look at slavery before the Civil War.
Correct.
There was a lot of willful participants in that.
Correct.
That thought that was totally okay to do that to another human being.
Right.
And again, the social justice camp, they can't correlate the two in today's day and age with this. It's slavery too to these girls.
Right.
And they said, well, it's willful. Well, it'd be like telling these folks, well, that was willful. Those people, it was legal, but that doesn't make it right.
Right. Well, and it doesn't necessarily make it willful. If you don't understand what is happening, if you're manipulated, the psychology behind it, it is not willful. When you look at an abused woman that keeps on going and doesn't press charges, right? That like breaking those cycles.
Sure.
That takes time, and things like abortion only further that damage, that psychological, that spiritual, that emotional, that physical damage that makes those scars deeper and deeper, so that when they are brought to the realization of, oh my gosh, that this is happening, right? And where they are brought out of that depravity that they're in, it brings even more. And that's what the enemy wants. That's 100% what the enemy wants.
Exactly. What do you got there, Mark?
So we've got a map here of Texas and New Mexico, and of course there's some counties outlined in red. And this is the battleground. You see, of course, the Texas-New Mexico border over here, and this border, the abortion industry is setting up shop. They want to set up shop right across the border. The two places when Roe v. Wade was overturned, the two places that Whole Women's Health
Mhm.
specifically was honing in on was Hobbs and Clovis.
Mhm.
Now, Hobbs is just 3-4 miles across the Texas-New Mexico border. And these areas, they're places that they don't want abortion
Mhm.
in their city. And there were people at the hospital in Clovis that were saying, look, if it comes to our hospital, it comes to our community, we're going to end up with the aftermath in our hospital. And they said, we don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
And so they were very glad when we introduced ordinances there. We drove Whole Women's Health 3 hours from 3 hours from Clovis and over 5 hours from Hobbs.
Mhm.
They eventually settled in Albuquerque. We protected the southeast New Mexico going upwards that border. However, the New Mexico Supreme Court has challenged those ordinances. We have oral arguments mid-December. We don't know what's going to happen
Mhm.
with those cases. But if we are going to take it up the chain, do whatever we can,
Sure.
but we don't know what's going to happen ultimately. And so as a state that is abortion-free, Texas needs to do whatever they
Mhm.
can do to make sure that we're loving our neighbor in New Mexico. Both the New Mexicans, but also loving the neighbors in our own communities
Right.
too, baby Texans and their moms.
Yes.
And what we're hearing is that ordinances which were passed in places like Lubbock and Cochran County and Mitchell County over
Yep.
there, shaded in red, that ordinances and even the ones being discussed in Amarillo, that they're already having an impact across the border. There's an abortionist from San Antonio that said that 85% of his clientele comes from Texas. And he said that there are no shows because people don't want to drive through Lubbock and Amarillo
Mhm.
for abortion. So these abortion trafficking ordinances are making an impact. And we're also seeing the opposition, when the opposition gets riled up.
Mhm.
Women's March, National Women's March has mobilized here in Amarillo. They've been set up here. Their executive director has lived here for about 2 years. So this is something that is on their radar. They're in opposition to it. Of course, there's been in the news this week was about the arrest of the individual from Florida, which threatened Judge Kaczmarek's life. And that person was arrested this past week. This is a pretty high profile case.
Yeah, for sure.
The city hears a lot of conservative cases. And so the opposition is very interested in what's going on here. And we need to do our part. We need to make sure that we know they are mobilizing. We need to make sure we are mobilizing and that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that the city of Amarillo and their citizens are protected with the fullest extent of the laws that we can have in place. The Texas Heartbeat Act was involved in that one line in there, which allows for private, for cities and counties to pass ordinances with these private enforcement mechanisms, going further than the Texas Heartbeat Act, and doing as much as we can to make sure that our cities and counties are the most pro-life places in the state of Texas.
The word of God says that we wrestle not against flesh and bone, but principalities, powers, and dominions. the proof is in the pudding in this. I mean, you see the opposition setting up these clinics. Yeah, they're making a lot of money because it's not your private citizen that has the money to create install these clinics. We know that it's never been really about women, it's about the money, but even beyond that, you hit on it about the demonic. Citizens of Amarillo, I just got to say, if God ever turns his face away from us, turns his back on us, we got bigger problems than abortion.
In New Mexico, the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham,
Yes.
that she set up an abortion helpline. And if you call that helpline, one of the places it sends you is a satanic temple.
Mm.
And so that just really shows reality that, yeah, we really are going against the dark forces.
Yeah.
And then also some of the groups that are committing to help Texas teens get abortions across state lines are groups like the Lilith Fund. Well, Lilith is named after a demon that preys on women and children.
Mm.
Now, I understand that these people are not good at coming up with names because they're pro-abortion and they abort kids, so they don't have to name kids. Us in the pro-life community, we name kids all the time, so we're good at coming up with names.
Yeah.
But this is the battle before us, that we are dealing with demonic groups that just so happen to be funded by people that are in support of all these Marxist and communist liberal policies. We see, shouldn't surprise us that when we look into Women's March, that we start to see some of the groups that have funded Women's March. Well, who has funded them? George Soros.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that the people of Amarillo really want that kind of ilk coming into town, change the makeup of this community. There was even an email that went out Women's March, coast to coast, to message the mayor and city council, Chicago and San Francisco. We saw the same thing happen in Ohio. $35 million came in from outside sources opposing pro-life.
And these are the same people that suggest that these measures are intrusive, but yet they're sending out hundreds of thousands of emails.
Well, and I also want to point out that it's not hyperbole. Marx has communist and Marxist ties.
Mm-hmm.
The George Soros tie, and if you look at, and this is unfortunately again that we face with those who want open borders. It's you said it earlier, genocide. We know that that's what it is, but I want to even take it, and we've already talked about it being demonic because Marxism, communism is demonic. We're not just pulling these things out of history shows this, right? This is documented. But the other thing of it is again, this comes down to whether we're talking about the border, whether we're talking about issues in our schools, whether we're talking about the abortion issues, all tied together. They have those common factors. It's all the same backers. It's all Satan behind it, just in the form of money, right? And names behind it, but it's the same players. And when you said, genocide, look at how Marxism and communism throughout history has led. It may seem like this is just a simple ordinance. How is Amarillo, Texas going to, be that? No, it really is. Because if you that these paid actors are here, that these elements are here. We're telling you, don't believe us. Reason is it and you still choose to say about that? How? At what point? When it's literally not, right? at what point do you say, oh yeah, you know what, let me make that phone call, let me show up to that city council meeting, let me send that email, right?
Mhm, mhm.
At what point is it quite literally in your front yard banging down your door before you do something?
Right.
And we're Christians here. I mean, the three of us are Christians. I know there's a lot of Christians in Amarillo,
Mhm.
and supreme law that we follow, the Word of God. And God is clear. God hates abortion. He hates the hands that shed innocent blood.
Yeah.
That's what Scripture says.
Yeah.
That it grieved the heart of God when Cain murdered his brother Abel, and that blood was shed on the soil. And we are living in a culture. Babies have been killed in New Mexico, Texas babies, and the bodies of babies have been taken back over here to Amarillo. What an insult that is. I don't know if that's still going on. I know it was going on.
Mhm.
Maybe the company has come to know the Lord and repented of their wicked ways.
Mhm.
If so, I'd love to that. But what a great insult it is to God
Mhm.
for those kind of actions that to make money off of the transportation of dead babies killed by abortion in New Mexico brought to Texas. And the whole issue of abortion, it grieves the heart of God, and evil in Texas as it is in New Mexico. The location isn't less heartbreaking to
Mhm.
God. It grieves him equally, and and we should do everything we can to work toward an abortion-free America. We have the ability to stop abortion trafficking. We have the ability to save innocent human beings made in the image of God. And Texas has always paved the way, right? Texas has been very influential in the politics of the United States. And I think a great policy would be unborn children are human beings made in the image of God, and they have the right to life. That's what we're fighting for. And so we're in a similar spot as our brothers and sisters were who fought against slavery.
Mhm.
And it's going to be rough.
Yeah.
But we need to stand our ground and do everything we can to fight for the right to life of our baby unborn brothers and sisters.
I went to that discussion at City Council, and the comment came up: Nazi Germany, neighbor against neighbor. And I thought about that for several days. That was such a lewd thing, to be put out. But the reality is this: with this abortion trafficking, we've just traded a train going to Auschwitz for just regular vehicles going to New Mexico. So, in some sense, I agree that it is that, but
On the ways implied.
yeah.
Right.
So, what would you have done if Hitler was? Would you have done the right? We heard about, I can't remember her name, Boom, somebody, she was having the,
Corey Ten Boom.
yeah. Would you have been one of them? You say you would have. A lot of people say, man, what a valiant effort. I would have been like Bonhoeffer. Here's your moment.
Yeah.
Here's your moment, church. Here's your moment.
And you
To
don't
be-
even have to leave town.
That's right. Here's your moment, Amarillo, Texas. Because history will record everything.
Right.
It will be there.
And I think people need to push back when they hear those comments about
Yeah.
Nazi Germany. I think
Yeah.
people need to say, hey, look, those who are trafficking people to abortions, those people are the ones like the
Exactly.
Nazis.
Exactly.
The innocent unborn children and their moms are like the Jews.
Exactly.
And, those of us who are trying to save lives, to save those lives, children and their moms, we're like those who
Mhm.
were trying to save
Mhm.
the Jews in the midst of a great
Yeah.
Holocaust in the nation.
Mhm.
There is a Holocaust happening
Yeah.
right now.
Well, I want to end with this right now since you're saying Holocaust. If you go look at the etymology of the word itself, and we're talking about the powers and dominions, go look it up. It means blood offering.
Man,
In the United States, it's a little over 65 million. And with that, I'll end. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. And oh, you can hit it, yeah.